Hello everyone. This is our sort of last online lesson. Oh my gosh, I can't talk. We're going to do a Zoom meeting for those of you that can make it next Tuesday. So this kind of feels like the last time I will really be making a video for this class, which is kind of weird to begin with because this is the first time I've ever taught online. If you hear very loud bird noises in the background, I have this window open. Also, as I was writing down what I wanted to talk about today, like just maybe 15 or so minutes ago, the door to this bedroom opened by itself. I'm not sure if it's because of the current of air, although there's like no wind outside right now, or what happened. I don't know. It was very creepy. I thought at first it was one of the cats. It was not one of the cats. My grandma's in her room. I don't know. I don't know what's going on, you guys. We've talked about this house potentially being haunted before. Oh, God. Okay, on that note, I want to talk to you guys about going easy on ourselves. This has been a really trying semester for all of us because of everything that is happening out in the world, in our personal lives, plus with coursework. And many of you are probably taking courses online for the first time too, and you might be doing it in a situation that is not entirely ideal. So take it easy on yourself. I know that we all have expectations for ourselves and we want to do well, but recognize right now that if you're not as productive as normal, then that is completely okay because there's so much stress just hovering everywhere. Sometimes like I will sit down to work on my dissertation and it's really hard. And usually I can just kind of like bang out some stuff. But recently it's been a lot harder. So take it easy on yourselves. And on that note, I'm sure you guys have gotten emails about this, but I want to reiterate it to you as well. I think it's after, please don't quote me on this. I think it's after you receive your final grades, within a week or so of receiving your final grades for this semester, you can choose to have the course labeled or turned into a pass-fail option. You might be able to do it too before grades or input, but I know you can definitely do it after. If you have questions about that, the person to ask is the registrar. I should know more about it, except that whenever you're working on a dissertation, you just get a pass-fail each semester until you complete it. And then also, it doesn't really, I think, ask for me to do anything other than to give you a letter grade. That's my understanding. If there's more to it, then I will make sure that I complete what needs to be done for you guys. But if you want a pass-fail option, that's applicable, I think, for every single course that you're taking, or nearly every single course. I also want to ask you guys to complete the SES for this course. Those surveys are so important to me. I read them. I do really appreciate the feedback that students give me, telling me what was useful, what they enjoyed from the course, what was not as useful, what they didn't enjoy, what they wanted more of, what they think I can do better. I actually take that stuff super seriously, so please give me your feedback because it helps me to make better courses in the future. Okay. And then before we actually like fully dive into the ending of this book, God, I wanted to know why I actually chose this novel. So I knew that I wanted to end the semester not necessarily with something that was going to be like more higher literary fiction. I thought, why not end with something that's going to be a fast read, maybe a more enjoyable read for a wider group of students, and that, we wouldn't have to get overly complex with. And so I knew that I wanted to end with a young adult novel. And there were a couple of contenders. One that I really wanted to teach was As You Darken or As I Darken by Kiersten White. That is amazing. It is alternative history. It's just mind-blowingly fantastic, but you can't really talk a lot about female leadership in that novel specifically without reading the whole series. So I was like, damn it! So then I was thinking, okay, what are some other good options here? And I had a couple on the table, and then I thought, well, Three Dark Crowns is a good option because, I don't know, every other book in the course has been weird, and I think the characters are kind of enjoyable. Again, I told you guys I'm very fond of Arsinoe. She's so stupid. And Billy, too. I actually really like Billy. Yeah, and as I was rereading this novel, there's some parts of it that are so predictable. You're just like, okay, Kendare Blake. But I was never able to predict throughout the series who eventually was going to end up queen, like at the very, very end of the series. There is someone. And when I was rereading this novel, I was like, I don't know why I didn't figure it out. I feel like I'm being slapped across the face, but hindsight is 20/20, so whatever. Okay, so just a very brief plot summary is that shit hits the fan. Billy decides, I'm gonna run away with Arsinoe. That ends poorly. Everybody goes to Innisfuel Valley for the quickening ceremony, which doesn't go well because the bear is unleashed. Catherine runs. Peter throws her into a cavern. And if you're like, what the fuck? Whenever you read that part, because you're like, Peter, what? I thought they were in love. They are. The next novel, you get to hear, well, first off, Catherine's like, bring Peter back in the next novel. And he's shitting his pants the whole time. But he and Catherine actually have multiple conversations about it. It's really, really interesting to see them deal with him throwing her down a hole. Oh my god. So if you want to know more about that, read book number 2, which I actually like better than this book. The ending of that book is really good. And then what else happens? Mirabella goes home pissed and disappointed. And then at the very end, Arsinoe actually realizes that she is not a naturalist. She was a poisoner this whole time, which is fascinating. So we understand then why Arsinoe's powers never manifested, because everybody was waiting for naturalist powers to manifest. They can't if she's a poisoner. So those are some of the big highlights. And essentially, what happens in book number 2 is that you just see like the real fight for the throne at that point. And it's a fight that kind of seems like it's solved at the end of book 2, but is not, because then books 3 and 4 really go hard. Book 3 in the series I don't actually like, but book 4 is really amazing and like made me upset a couple times, but like in a good way. Okay. Let's start off by talking about the sentience of Fennbirn Island. I've mentioned this before. I think I've done some analysis of it in the past. I'm going to page 285. I'm sure you guys have probably noticed it and have been weirded out. I think that's probably a reason why I like these books too, is because there's a kind of sentience to the land and waterscapes in and around Fennbirn Island. And in some ways, it's actually familiar to the way in which the island space of Willow Springs in Mama Day is kind of sentient. And that has to do with this kind of goddess-like figure of Saphira Wade. Here we have another kind of sentient island that has to do with a literal goddess. Okay, so just a very little paragraph in the middle of page 285. This is from Mirabella's perspective. She's in her tent at Innisfuel. I think this is before the quickening and everything. The priestesses say she, Mirabella, ought to feel more like herself here, more like a queen when she is at the island's heart and so near to the goddess's pulse in the deep, dark chasm of the Breccia domain. But she does not. Mirabella feels the island hum beneath her feet, and she does not like it at all. First off, again, we see Mirabella kind of rebelling against the expectations of her. She doesn't actually like this kind of feeling of being like, oh, the island is alive. But she also feels some kind of presence from it. That kind of hum is almost like the island's heartbeat. You get this image or the sensation of a heartbeat too whenever Madrigal takes Arsinoe to what they term the bent over tree in the woods near Wolf Spring. And I think it's noted a couple of times that there seems to be a kind of pulse to that place, that you can feel the eye of the goddess upon you there. And so there's certain places like on the island where you can tell that things are like really alive and something kind of mystical is happening here. And it really seems like the island has a will of its own, and Arsinoe really experiences this big time. So let's go to page 322. Okay. Yeah, so we know that whenever Arsinoe was young, Joseph and Jules tried to get her off the island. The mist would not let them go. And Billy tries it again, and things get even weirder. I'm reading at the top of 322. This is after she and Billy have washed up on the beach at Innisfuel, and the priestesses have found her and brought her to that tent. Luca sighs, but she smiles at Arsinoe kindly, trying to be patient. What do you want, then? Do you know where you are? I tried to get away from you, Arsinoe says. I tried to run, but the mist wouldn't let me go. We fought. We paddled, but it held us like a net. Arsinoe, Kate says. Do not say any more. It doesn't matter, Kate, because I couldn't get away. She held us in that fog until she spit us out right into this cursed harbor. Arsinoe's arms tremble, but her eyes do not waver. They are red and weary, full of hatred and despair, but they remain fixed on the high priestess's face. And by that she there, she spit us out, she held us in the fog, she means the goddess, right? And the goddess in the island in some ways in this text, much like you could argue Saphira and Willow Springs do in Mama Day, kind of collapse and become one. The goddess is somehow able to enact her will through the mist, and not only does she keep Billy and Arsinoe from escaping with the mist, but she moves them on the other side of the island and spits them out. So she's able to really enact her will, it seems like, particularly on people who are tied to her, which are the three queens. I feel like I'm going to sneeze. Am I going to sneeze? Oh my god. Oh my god. Okay. Woo. That's from having the window open. Ugh, spring is really messing with me. So it's kind of interesting to think about how Arsinoe, whenever she's fighting against the goddess, whenever Mirabella is fighting against the expectations for her too, they are in some ways literally like trying to rebel against the landscape and the waterscape around them. And how, as Arsinoe notes, she says, we fought, we paddled, but it held us like a net, that the natural world is kind of able to fight back to enact a certain kind of will. Let's talk about what happens next, starting on page 323 and lasting until 326, which is Mirabella saving Arsinoe. I'm going to kind of read a couple of passages here, just between 323 and 326. If you don't want to exactly follow along and you just want to listen, that's fine, because I'm going to keep skipping around. Arsinoe, Mirabella whispers. Arsinoe used to chase Catherine like a monster through the muddy bank. She was always dirty, always angry, always laughing. No, Mirabella shouts, you will not do this. She calls down the storm almost without knowing it. Wind bows the sides of the tent and tears at the flaps. The priestesses upon Arsinoe are so focused that they do not notice until the first bolt of lightning shakes the ground beneath them. Mirabella gathers Arsinoe into her lap and brushes salty, filthy hair from her sister's cheek. The storm calms. It's all right now. Mirabella says softly, you will be all right. Arsinoe blinks her tired black eyes. You're going to pay for this, she says. I do not care, says Mirabella. Let them execute us both. Arsinoe snorts. I'd like to see them try. Mirabella kisses her sister's forehead. She is weak and feverish. Arsinoe struggles out of Mirabella's arms. That too is like the sister she remembers. Always a wild thing, not made for cuddling. Okay, I'm going to skip down to the bottom of 325. Let you what? Listen, this is Arsinoe talking. Listen, I know you think you did something really grand just now. but I'm here, I'm caught, we all are. And that's interesting that they're caught, they're kind of imprisoned, right? They're imprisoned by the island's expectations for them, both the population and the island itself. You hate me then? Mirabella asks, you want to kill me? Yes, I hate you. Arsinoe says, I always have. I didn't try to escape so I could spare you. It's not about you. Mirabella watches her sister limp toward the tent flap. I suppose I have been very stupid, Mirabella says. I suppose. Stop sounding so sad and stop looking at me that way. This is what we are. It doesn't matter that we didn't ask for it. Arsinoe grabs onto the flap of the tent. She hesitates as though she might say more, as though she might be sorry. I hate you a little less now, she says quietly, and then she's such an emotionally constipated character. She really is. What's interesting here is, again, we see Mirabella remembers her sisters whenever they were young. Arsinoe doesn't. But also what's really key in this scene is something that some of you guys were actually picking up on in response to question number 3 from Shannon last class, is the importance of female relationships in this novel. You might talk about the relationship that the queens have with their kind of foster mothers that raised them. You might talk about the relationships that the queens have with people who are close to them, particularly Arsinoe and Mirabella. They both have female friends with whom they have very deep, deep friendships that kind of help them throughout this novel and continue to do so throughout the rest of the series. They're really important to their existence, essentially. And here, the kind of relationship between the sisters, Mirabella is continuously trying. She does not want to hurt her sisters. She loves them. And it really, what becomes kind of the core of this series, and you start to see it developing in this book, is that the relationship between these sisters is kind of what is shaping who is going to end up taking the throne. Who is going to end up taking the throne? So the potential for female relationships to determine the course of everything, of character arcs, of events that happen, of who is going to be the island's leader, that's monumental to think that women, when they work together or when they're in conflict, have this kind of power over everything around them. Also, something that I want to point out about this novel, and other texts that we've read, but I think it's really interesting here, especially because we're talking about female relationships, is that this novel does pass the Bechdel test. Now, if you don't know what the Bechdel test is, it's something developed by a writer whose last name is Bechdel. She's the author of a book called, graphic novel called Fun Home. And she says that the test is really simple. Can women have a conversation that is just not about men? Can they have a conversation that's just not about men? You would be surprised how many movies and TV shows and novels, plays, even things from today, do not pass this test. Most television shows do not pass this test. Most movies do not pass this test. A lot of novels that are seen as high literature or even really progressive do not pass this test. Women, honestly, do not spend all of their time talking about men. And so the idea of the Bechdel test is, can we portray what women really talk about, which is just not men 24/7. And this novel does that. It just happened in the conversation that Mirabella and Arsinoe had. They weren't talking about a man. They were talking about the circumstances that they're in and their feelings for one another. And a lot of that, too, is dependent upon the ways, again, in which women work to uplift each other throughout this novel and throughout some of the other ones. Okay, where do I want to go next? Let's talk about the Breccia domain, which is really creepy and only gets creepier in subsequent books. So let's go to pages 298 through 299. It is associated, that's what I'm looking for. It is associated in this book and throughout the rest of the series with Catherine. And she and, I'm on the wrong page. Did I say 298 through 299? That's where you need to be. The neighbors are doing weird things. The neighbors here are so weird. They also suck at social distancing. It's absolutely horrific. So, the Breccia domain is really creepy. Catherine goes to see it actually with Peter. I'm really sorry. It's so distracting. Maybe I should have worked out at the kitchen table. Okay. So I'm going to start reading. On page 298. It is so black, Catherine says. Yes, says Peter, but you ought to know what black is, being a queen, because they have black eyes, black hair. They're always dressed all in black. That's the only color that queens wear. His voice comes from a distance. Behind her, he refused to go so close to the edge, but the moment Catherine saw the Breccia domain, she dropped onto her belly and slithered up to it like a snake. The Breccia domain is the deep chasm in the ground that they call the heart of the island. It is a sacred place. They say it has no bottom, and seeing it, Catherine cannot describe its darkness. It is so black that it is almost blue. Let's skip to the top of 299. She laughs and hangs her head over the edge. Peter cannot feel what she feels as a queen. This place is for her kind. She takes another deep, deep breath. The Breccia domain feels. The Breccia domain is, in that way that so many other sacred places on Fennbirn are, but the domain is where all those other places connect. It is the source. Had Catherine been raised in the temples like Mirabella, she might have better words for the hum in the air and how it makes the back of her neck prickle. The cold, dense air of it rushes into her blood and makes her so giddy that she almost laughs. I'm going to skip down again. She rests her head on her hand and continues to look down into the fissure. Peter is right. She should not like it so well. In generations past, the domain is where they would throw the bodies of the queens who did not survive their ascension years. Genevieve says at the bottom of the hole they lie in piles, shattered. But now Catherine does not think so. The Breccia domain is so vast and deep, those queens cannot be broken at the bottom. They must all still be falling. Again, this just reiterates a point I brought up earlier, this idea of the island as kind of having a heartbeat, of being sentient, of having a kind of will. What's interesting, too, is that this is a site where they used to throw the bodies of dead queens. And so it turns out that this is not just myth. This is true, as you find out in book number 2. So we're going to take that story here and use it as true and talk about it as true. And what's interesting is that if you think about the Breccia domain in that way as containing the bodies of these queens of the past, the Breccia domain is a kind of space of deep time. It contains the island's tragic, ruthless history. And if it is the heart of the island, the idea that it contains that tragic, ruthless history may also explain why the island itself and its various society is kind of built upon this ruthlessness. Even though it is a matriarchal society, it is an extremely still competitive society. Think about all these characters that are often competing with one another. The Arryns are extremely competitive. The queens have to compete with one another. Arsinoe is constantly being compared to Jules, and she should be more like Jules, right? At least in terms of her powers. And it's also a place that rings of death. And this idea of death has been associated with Kat's character from the very beginning. So think about how we're told how thin she is, how brittle her hair is, how pale she is, how little. And she almost kind of acts, especially at the beginning of the novel, before Peter comes and starts to change things, like a living corpse. And here she becomes associated with the rest of these bodies. And this is especially true because later on we see that Peter actually pushes her into the Brachio domain. So she becomes another of those many queens that are apparently forever falling into the heart of the island. She, we might say, transforms into one of those corpses as well, now quite literally. And this is also key to Catherine's villain arc, which I mentioned in my very first video on this topic. So let's go to 389 through 390. Okay, this is right at the end. It's so creepy whenever Natalia is just like at Groove's Drake Manor, and then she's like, somebody's over there. She goes over and she's like, Catherine. Because they thought Catherine was dead. She was missing for over a week. Okay, I'm going to start right in the middle of 389. The figure does not respond. As Natalia walks closer, she begins to fear that it is a figment of her imagination, that her mind is fractured, and at any moment the girl will vanish or dissolve into a pile of lice. Natalia reaches out, and Catherine looks up into her eyes. Catherine, Natalia says, and crushes the girl to her chest. It is Catherine, dirty and cold but alive. Cuts mar every inch of her skin. Her mangled hands hang limp by her sides, tipped in dark red with most of the fingernails torn off. I did not fall, Catherine croaks. Her voice is rough, as though her throat is filled with grave dirt. We must get you warm, Catherine says. Edmund, bring blankets and run a bath. I do not want that, says Catherine. What do you mean, sweetheart? What do you want? I want revenge, she whispers, and her fingers trail bloody streaks down Natalia's arms, and then I want my crown. What's interesting is that Catherine's voice croaks. Her hands are kind of mangled and almost like decaying. And it sounds as though her throat is filled with grave dirt, to quote the book exactly. It's almost like Catherine is kind of zombified here, that she is not quite Cat. Upon her return, something really dire happened to her there, and it has put her closer in some ways with death. It may have also put her in some ways closer with the goddess. And this linking of the goddess and death is really kind of fascinating. You might even think of the way in which the queen who wins and ends up taking the throne as in killing her sisters, committing sacrifices for the goddess. This is a goddess that is not like kind of benevolent like Saphira Wade was. She is a goddess that thrives upon death. And now Cat seems to have kind of taken on that kind of energy and that mantle. And she herself kind of becomes, again, in a return to the beginning of the novel, but in a more extreme way now, this kind of walking embodiment of death. And also what's key here is that we see the determination which with Cat ends the novel. Remember I told you this is about her villain arc. She tainted the candy that was sent to Arsinoe and poisoned Jules. That's implied in this novel. It's explicitly stated in the next one. She's the one who did that. So she doesn't waste any time. She immediately goes on to try to kill her sisters. And you can see that she's determined. She says, I want revenge, and then I want my crown. So apparently she wants revenge against her sisters. Does that extend to Peter? Novel 2 answers that question. Let's talk about Mirabella's determination at the end. That's on page 386 through 87. Mirabella is really shocked at the quickening whenever the bear kind of comes for her. She thinks that, she's like, I can't believe I saved Arsinoe and now she's trying to kill me. Like, she is in awe that this is happening. Of course, we know that that's Jules, and it's all over Joseph. Is he really worth it? I don't think so. That aside, Mirabella feels really betrayed. I'm going to start around the middle of page 386. Her friends look down sadly. They will not tell her that Arsinoe did not mean it, sending the bear after Mirabella. And she does not want them to. She has had days to relive that terror and for the hurt in her heart to turn to anger. Perhaps Arsinoe also murdered Catherine. Perhaps she had some other creature waiting for her when she ran away into the woods. Sweet little Catherine, who she and Arsinoe used to swear to protect. Okay, let's skip over to 387, the very end here. That is good, Mirabella says. I do not want her to hesitate. I want her to push me and push me until I hate her. She looks back out the window to escape the knowing sadness in Bree's and Elizabeth's eyes. They knew it would come to this. Everyone knew, except for Mirabella, that she is through being sentimental. Seeing that bear and Arsinoe's cold face behind that mask showed her the truth. The sisters she loved at the Black Cottage are gone. Arsinoe saw her chance, and she took it. So next time, Mirabella will take hers as well. Again, this has to do with Mirabella. Mirabella's kind of determination here. Her saying, like, I guess the sisters that I loved are gone. So what am I left with? Only myself and my friends. So I have to protect myself and protect them. That's kind of the thought process that is happening here for Mirabella in her betrayal. And you see her end with this kind of determination, too, that she is going to actively participate in the competition now. So 2 out of 3 sisters are like, okay, it's time to go, bitch. And then there's Arsinoe, who, let's go to the very last page of the novel, page 398, who has this kind of self-realization here at the end. All of the sisters do. Kat has this self-realization about her power and her determination. Mirabella has this kind of self-realization about, like, I'm going to have to protect myself. My sisters are gone. The sisters that I loved are gone, at least. And Arsinoe's is that she was never a naturalist at all. So I'm going to start with the first full paragraph on page 398. Just read right into the end of the novel. I have to tell you something. She's talking to Jules. Arsinoe says, about the candy. What? Is it Billy? Did he do it? No, I don't know. I don't think so. She swallows and looks at Jules with bright eyes. I ate it too. Jules stares at her, confused. When I put the box on the desk, Arsinoe says, before I came to get you in the field, I ate 3 of them. 2 chocolates and a taffy. Arsinoe. When have you known me to turn away candy? I don't understand, says Jules. Neither did I, Arsinoe says. Not at first. You were so sick, and Joseph said you only ate 1, and I was so worried about you that for a while I didn't think about it at all. But then you woke up, and I knew. Arsinoe leans forward on her elbows. I haven't been a giftless queen all this time, Jules, unable to sprout a beanstalk or turn a tomato red or get some stupid bird to sit on my shoulder. Fucking birds. Her voice grows louder and faster until she catches herself and quiets. All this time I thought I was nothing, but I'm not nothing, Jules. Arsinoe looks up and smiles. I'm a poisoner. And again, Arsinoe has that realization because she was immune. She ate the candy and was like, delicious. Continued about her day. Was not affected by the poison at all. So Arsinoe realized that she's not giftless as she has thought this entire time. Now remember, the reason that she relied on low magic is because she wasn't able to actually manifest a gift, so it gave her some kind of semblance or idea of a sense of worth, this use of low magic, because she was actually kind of powerful with it, as we saw. But now she realizes, I've been powerful all along. I just didn't know it, because I wasn't in the right circumstances to realize how powerful I really am. This can be said of, I think, a lot of women too, is that we don't realize a lot of times how smart or how strong or how athletic or how kind or whatever we are because of the circumstances around us, the kind of societal expectations that are in place. This is true for men too, or anybody of any gender. It's just interesting to see it enacted by a woman in this novel. Okay, and now a very quick note on some leaders that I want to liken this to. First off, I want to liken these queens to Cleopatra. If you remember at the very beginning of this semester, I said Cleopatra has a sister. Remember her sister's name. Her sister's name is Arsinoe. And Cleopatra is part of killing her own older sister, Arsinoe. So, yeah, I don't know. Take that as you will. but also because of the way in which Cleopatra had to really fight to secure her place on the throne. His can also be likened, I think, to King Lear's 3 daughters. I'm pretty sure that for Kendare Blake, King Lear was actually an influence. I'm almost positive, because you do have 3 sisters fighting over a crown. One of them is really loyal and loves her sisters. One of them is hyper villainous. And, you know, where does Arsinoe's character fit in there? It doesn't quite, but you can really see Kat and Mirabella as represented by Goneril and Regan, and then Cordelia, respectively. Yeah, and they're also fighting in an island nation, because that's what England is. It's an island nation. It is. And you can also think about, too, in relation to Alexandra Bergson from O Pioneers, how Alexandra really had to kind of prove her worth, and people doubted her continuously. And that's really true for Kat and Arsinoe here, too, that they tried desperately to prove their worth. They resort to trickery, whereas Alexandra doesn't, but you can still see that struggle to prove yourself and to prove that you are worthy of a leadership role. Okay, I hope you guys have enjoyed all the novels that we got to read this semester. I've enjoyed getting to reread some of my favorite books with you guys. Please make sure that you do the discussion board posts, and I will hopefully see most of you in real time on Tuesday. Bye!